The rifle shot echoed across the Montana wilderness, as the evening sun painted the sky in hues of amber and gold. Blood trickling down the worn wooden planks of Killian Xanders' porch, not human blood, but that of the rattlesnake he'd just dispatched with practiced precision before it could strike at his boot heel. It was the summer of 1878, and Killian had grown accustomed to this solitary ritual, watching sunsets from his isolated ranch with only the distant howl of wolves and the whisper of wind through tall grass to keep him company. At 32, Killian had long ago resigned himself to a life of solitude. The Civil War had taken his youth, the harsh frontier had claimed his family, and whiskey had become his most faithful companion. His ranch, nestled in a verdant valley 15 miles from the growing settlement of Copper Creek, was both his sanctuary and his prison. The war-weathered cowboy rarely ventured into town except for supplies, preferring the honest company of his horses and cattle to the often duplicitous nature of men. Killian used the toe of his boot to nudge the dead snake off his porch, then settled back into his hand-carved rocking chair, a glass of whiskey balanced on the weathered armrest. His calloused fingers traced the worn grip of his Colt revolver, a habit born of years on the frontier where survival depended on vigilance. The last rays of sunlight caught in his unkempt beard, highlighting the strands of premature gray that had appeared after antietam. Just as he raised the glass to his lips, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the evening stillness. Killian's hand instinctively moved to his revolver, eyes narrowing as he peered down the dirt trail that led to his homestead. In this wild country, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. The figure that emerged from the gathering dusk was not what he expected. A woman, clearly exhausted, swayed precariously atop a lathered horse that looked as spent as its rider. Her clothes, once fine, were now tattered and stained with dust and what appeared to be blood. Golden red hair escaped from beneath a practical hat, framing a face that, despite evident exhaustion, possessed a striking beauty that caused Killian to momentarily forget his customary wariness. She guided her horse to the hitching post with the last of her strength. As she attempted to dismount, her legs buckled beneath her. Without thinking, Killian vaulted over the porch railing and rushed to catch her before she hit the ground. "Easy there, madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse as he supported her weight. Up close, he could see her face was bruised, a cut above her right eyebrow crusted with dried blood. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know if I would find anyone out here." "You're a long way from anywhere," Killian observed, helping her toward the porch steps. "What brings a lady like yourself to this forsaken stretch of territory?" Her green eyes, bright with fever, met his. "Men with guns. Bad men. They're hunting me." Before Killian could respond, she went limp in his arms, unconscious. With a muttered curse, he lifted her completely, noting with concern how light she felt despite her tall frame. The practicality of frontier life took over as he carried her into his cabin, mind already calculating what this development might mean for his peaceful isolation. The cabin's interior was sparse but orderly, a testament to Killian's military background. He gently laid the woman on his bed, the only proper piece of furniture in the single room dwelling besides a sturdy table, 2 chairs, and a chest containing his few possessions. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its embers still glowing from the evening meal. Killian stoked the fire before retrieving his medical supplies, another relic of his war days, when he'd served as an impromptu field medic more times than he cared to remember. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady as he examined her wounds with professional detachment. The cut above her eye would need cleaning but wouldn't require stitches. What worried him more was the heat radiating from her skin and the irregular pulse beneath his fingers. He worked methodically, cleaning her visible injuries with water he'd heated on the stove and whiskey from his dwindling supply. As he tended to her, Killian tried to piece together who she might be. Her hands, though currently dirty, showed no signs of hard labor. Her clothing, beneath the dust and blood, was of quality material. Not a frontier woman, certainly not a farmer's wife or a saloon girl. Something about her spoke of education and refinement qualities rarely found in this remote territory. After ensuring she was as comfortable as possible, Killian retrieved his Winchester rifle and stepped outside to care for her horse. The animal was nearly spent, its flanks heaving with exhaustion. After unsaddling it and providing water and feed, Killian examined the saddle for any clues to the woman's identity. In one of the saddlebags, he found a small journal bound in fine leather with the initials WG embossed in gold. Though tempted to read it for information that might help him understand her situation, some vestige of pre-war manners prevented him from invading her privacy. Beside the journal was a small Derringer pistol, the kind favored by ladies for personal protection, and a drawstring pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. Not a robbery victim, then. Whatever trouble pursued her wasn't after money. Returning to the cabin, Killian found the woman still unconscious but restless, her head turning from side to side as she murmured incoherently. He placed a cool cloth on her forehead and settled into his chair by the fireplace, rifle across his lap, preparing for a long night. "Who are you?" He whispered to the sleeping stranger, unsure whether he was more concerned about the danger she might bring to his doorstep or the unwelcome way her presence stirred something long dormant within him. As the night deepened, Killian maintained his vigil, occasionally refreshing the cloth on her forehead or adding wood to the fire. Around midnight, she began to thrash in the grip of fevered nightmares. "No, please," she cried out, her voice clearer than before. "Father, you don't understand what he's done." Killian moved to the bedside. Unsure how to offer comfort to this stranger, he awkwardly placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now, madam. No one's going to harm you here." Her eyes flew open, wild with fear before gradually focusing on his face. "Water," she managed to rasp. He helped her sit up enough to drink from a tin cup, supporting her head with a gentleness that surprised even himself. When she had drunk her fill, she collapsed back against the pillow, studying him with wary intensity. "My name is Willow," she said finally. "Willow Grayson, Killian Xanders," he replied with a short nod. "This is my ranch you've stumbled upon. How long have I been here?" "Just a few hours. You rode in at sunset, nearly fell off your horse, been out cold since then." He hesitated, then added, "You mentioned men hunting you." A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, they'll be coming. I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door, Mr. Xanders." "Killian," he corrected automatically. "And trouble's no stranger to me, Miss Grayson." "Willow, please," she insisted, attempting to sit up further before wincing in pain. "Best you rest," Killian advised. "Whatever's chasing you won't find this place easily, especially in the dark. Come morning, we can figure what to do." She nodded reluctantly, her eyelids already growing heavy. "Thank you, most men would have left me to my fate." Killian returned to his chair, considering her words. Perhaps most men would have, particularly in this unforgiving country where survival often meant minding one's own business. But despite his years of self-imposed isolation, some part of him, a part he thought long dead, couldn't turn away from someone in need. As dawn approached, Killian dozed fitfully, one ear always alert for sounds of approaching riders. The first light of morning found him preparing a simple breakfast of coffee, bacon, and johnny cakes. The familiar routine helped settle his discomfort at having his solitary existence so suddenly disrupted. Willow stirred as the aroma of coffee filled the cabin. She pushed herself to a sitting position with evident effort, her hair a tangled cascade around her shoulders. "Good morning," Killian offered stiffly, unused to morning pleasantries after years alone. "Good morning," she returned, her voice stronger than the night before. "I've imposed on your hospitality enough. If I could trouble you for some water to wash and perhaps something to eat, I'll be on my way." Killian set a plate and cup on the small table beside the bed. "You're in no condition to travel. Your horse needs rest too." She accepted the food gratefully but frowned at his assessment. "I can't stay, the men following me." She trailed off, taking a sip of coffee. "Who are they?" Killian asked directly. "And why are they after you?" Willow seemed to weigh her words carefully. "My father was a judge in Helena. These men, they're associates of someone he sentenced. A man named Victor Blackstone." Killian's expression darkened. He knew the name, well, most people in the territory did. Blackstone had built a mining empire through intimidation, violence, and political corruption. Blackstone doesn't take kindly to legal interference. No, Willow agreed grimly. He had my father murdered 3 weeks ago, made it look like a robbery gone wrong, but I knew. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. I found evidence in my father's study documents proving Blackstone's involvement in claim jumping, bribery of officials, even ordering killings. And they know you have this evidence, she nodded. I was going to take it to the federal marshal in Fort Benton, but Blackstone's men caught up with me in a small settlement 2 days' ride from here. I barely escaped. Her green eyes met his, resolute despite her condition. I need to reach the marshal. Those documents are the only chance for justice for my father and all of Blackstone's other victims. Killian ran a hand through his dark hair, considering the implications. Harboring someone targeted by Victor Blackstone was tantamount to painting a target on one's own back. The sensible thing would be to send her on her way once she was strong enough to travel. Yet something in her determined gaze stirred his long, dormant sense of duty. Fort Benton's a 4-day ride from here in good weather with a fresh horse, he said finally. Your mount needs at least 2 days' rest before it can make such a journey. I don't have 2 days, Willow insisted. They can't be far behind me. Then we'll have to make sure they don't find you, Killian decided, surprising himself with the "we" that had slipped into his statement. This valley has plenty of places to hide if it comes to that. Relief flooded her features. Thank you. I know I'm asking a lot of a stranger. Killian moved to the window, scanning the landscape out of habit. I fought for the Union, he said quietly. Saw too many good men die for principles that seemed to be forgotten as soon as the shooting stopped. Your father sounds like a man who stood by his principles. He did, Willow confirmed softly, even when it cost him everything. A moment of understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared values despite their different backgrounds. Killian cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the sudden connection. You should rest more, he advised, taking her empty plate. I need to tend to the stock and check the surroundings. Best if you stay inside. After Willow nodded her agreement, Killian stepped outside into the cool morning air. His routine chores of feeding livestock and checking fences took on new urgency, as he used them as cover to scout the approaches to his property. The valley was quiet except for the natural sounds of wildlife and the occasional lowing of his cattle, but Killian knew better than to trust apparent peace. As he worked, his mind kept returning to his unexpected guest. There was something about Willow Grayson that unsettled him, not in the way danger did, but in a manner he hadn't experienced in many years. Her courage in the face of overwhelming odds reminded him of a time when he too had believed in fighting for what was right, before disillusionment and loss had driven him to this self-imposed exile. By midday, Killian had completed a wide circuit of his property and was reasonably confident they weren't in immediate danger. Returning to the cabin, he found Willow attempting to sweep the floor, one hand braced against the wall for support. "What are you doing?" He asked, more gruffly than intended. She straightened, wincing slightly. "I couldn't just lie there any longer, and I wanted to be useful." Killian shook his head, taking the broom from her hands. "You need to recover your strength. Besides, I know where everything is in my own home." A faint smile touched her lips. "Are you always this hospitable to uninvited guests, Mr. Xanders?" "Don't get many guests, invited or otherwise," he replied, setting the broom aside. "And I told you it's Killian." "Killian," she repeated, and something about the way his name sounded in her voice made him turn away abruptly. "I'll fix some lunch," he said, moving to the small pantry. "Then we should discuss what happens next." They ate a simple meal of beans, dried venison, and the last of the morning's Jonna cakes. Willow ate with obvious hunger but maintained the manners of her upbringing, a contrast to Killian's utilitarian approach to food. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Army," Killian answered shortly, "then necessity. Not much call for fancy cooking when you're eating alone. You've been alone out here for a long time." Her question held genuine curiosity rather than pity, which made it easier for him to answer. 8 years on this land. Before that, drifted some after the war. He didn't elaborate on the nightmares that still plagued him or how human company had become more burden than comfort after seeing the worst men could do to one another. And before the war, Willow pressed gently, Killian's expression hardened. Different life, different man. He stood abruptly, taking their plates. We need to prepare in case Blackstone's men find this place. How many were following you? Willow accepted the change of subject gracefully. 4 that I saw, led by a man called Reese Tall with a scar across his chin. He's Blackstone's enforcer. Killian nodded grimly. Neil Reese had a reputation throughout the territory as a ruthless killer who enjoyed his work too much. We'll need to be ready for them. Can you shoot? My father taught me, she confirmed. Though I'm better with a rifle than a handgun. Good. Killian moved to a trunk in the corner and unlocked it, revealing an arsenal that spoke of a man prepared for trouble. He selected a carbine that would be manageable for her. Winchester 73, 15 rounds in the magazine, lighter than my hunting rifle. Willow took it with familiar ease that confirmed her claim. Thank you. Where are the documents I was carrying? In your saddlebag where I found them. Didn't look at them, he added. She nodded appreciatively. I should check on them. While Willow retrieved her possessions, Killian began methodically checking and loading his weapons. His Colt revolver was always maintained, but he also prepared a shotgun and his Sharps rifle, a deadly accurate weapon he'd acquired during the war. Willow returned with a leather document case, which she opened on the table. Inside were several official-looking papers covered in precise handwriting, along with what appeared to be ledgers and correspondence. This is everything, she said, relief evident in her voice. Financial records showing bribes to 3 territorial officials, witness statements about claim jumping that turned violent, and this, she held up a letter. Blackstone explicitly ordering the removal of a family who refused to sell their mining claim. Killian examined the documents with a critical eye. Enough to hang him if it reaches the right hands. Yes, Willow agreed, carefully returning everything to the case. That's why I can't let them catch me. It's not just about justice for my father anymore. This could free the entire territory from Blackstone's grip. The weight of her mission settled over them both. Killian found himself admiring her determination despite the dangers she faced. Many would have fled the territory entirely, seeking safety rather than justice. We have 2 choices, he said after a moment's consideration. Try to reach Fort Benton knowing they're likely watching the trails, or make a stand here if they track you this far. I can't ask you to risk your life and home for my cause, Willow protested. Killian's weathered face revealed little emotion, but his eyes held a glint of something long-buried purpose, perhaps. Sometimes a man needs reminding of what's worth fighting for. Their planning was interrupted by the distant but unmistakable sound of a horse's whinny that wasn't from Killian's stock. He moved to the window in a fluid motion, peering cautiously through the curtain. Riders, he confirmed grimly. 2 coming from the East Ridge, likely scouts. Willow's face paled, but her voice remained steady. They found me faster than I expected. They haven't found you yet, Killian corrected. Just the general direction. He handed her the carbine. Take position at the back window. Don't fire unless I tell you or they breach the cabin. While Willow moved to her assigned post, Killian quickly gathered additional ammunition and water. Years of living on the frontier had taught him to prepare for the worst while hoping for better. If things go bad, he told her quietly, there's a root cellar beneath the bedroom floorboards. Trapdoor under the rug. Leads to a tunnel that comes out near the creek. Head north from there, stay in the water to hide your trail. Willow looked at him with sudden intensity. You've prepared for something like this before. Man doesn't live alone in wild country without planning escape routes, Killian replied evasively. Now keep low and quiet. Let's see what they do. The 2 riders approached cautiously, circling the property at a distance that suggested they were uncertain whether they'd found their quarry. Killian recognized the tactical assessment. These weren't ordinary hired guns but men with experience. They're not sure, he whispered to Willow. Might just be checking every homestead in the area. The leader, Reese, is he one of them? She asked. Killian studied the distant figures. No. These are underlings, scouts. That was both good and bad news. Good because Reese wasn't yet convinced Willow had come this way, bad because if these men reported back, the full force would descend on them. After completing their circuit, the riders conferred briefly, then to Killian's dismay, began approaching the cabin directly. "They're coming in," he muttered. "Stay hidden. Let me handle this." Willow retreated deeper into the shadows of the cabin while Killian assumed a casual posture, shotgun hidden just inside the door, but within easy reach. When the riders were about 50 yards out, he stepped onto the porch, deliberately unarmed but with his hand near where his revolver would normally be. "That's far enough," he called, his voice carrying the natural authority of a man comfortable with command. "State your business." The riders stopped, hands conspicuously away from their weapons. The older of the two, a weathered man with a drooping mustache, raised his voice in return. "Looking for a woman, mister. Red-headed gal might be injured. Seen anyone like that?" "Haven't seen a woman in these parts in months," Killian replied easily. "What's she done?" "Theft," the younger rider answered too quickly. "Stole valuables from her employer in Helena. Family sent us to bring her home." Killian allowed skepticism to show on his face. "Must be mighty valuable items to send men chasing her this far into nowhere." The older man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sentimental value. Mind if we water our horses at your creek? Been riding since dawn." It was a transparent attempt to get closer to the property, to look for signs of Willow's presence. Killian knew refusing would only increase their suspicion. "Creek's over there," he gestured casually, "but make it quick. I've got work to do and I don't much care for unexpected company." The men guided their horses toward the small stream that ran near the corral. Killian remained on the porch, apparently relaxed but watching their every move. The younger rider dismounted to fill their canteens, while the older one remained in the saddle, his eyes scanning the property with practiced attention. Inside the cabin, Willow pressed herself against the wall beside the window, carbine ready but out of sight. She could hear the men's voices but not make out their words. The waiting was almost worse than direct confrontation, at least in flight or fight. There was action to focus on rather than this stretched wire of tension. Outside, the older rider had spotted something that caught his interest. He nudged his horse closer to Killian's corral, where Willow's exhausted mount was recovering. "That's a fine animal," he commented too casually. "Bit different breed than your other stock." Killian had anticipated this. Won him in a poker game last week in Copper Creek. Previous owner didn't know how to treat a good horse. The man's expression revealed nothing, but Killian could sense his suspicion. "Funny coincidence. The woman we're looking for was riding a horse just like that one." "Lot of bay horses in the territory," Killian replied evenly. "You boys finding what you need at my creek?" The younger man had completed filling their canteens, but was now examining the ground near the water, undoubtedly looking for tracks. "All set," he called, remounting with a meaningful glance at his companion. The older rider nodded slightly. "We appreciate the water, mister. If you do happen to see a woman matching her description, tall, red hair, green eyes, probably injured, there's a reward for information. $20. "I'll keep that in mind," Killian said, making no move to ask further questions that might indicate interest. The riders tipped their hats in farewell and turned their horses back toward the eastern ridge. Killian remained on the porch until they were distant figures against the landscape before returning inside. Willow emerged from her position, face tense. "They suspect something." "Yes," Killian agreed grimly. "They saw your horse. My explanation won't hold once they report back to Reese." "How much time do we have?" Killian calculated quickly. "Those two will rejoin their main group, probably camped within a few hours' ride. Once Reese hears their report, he'll decide whether to come in force. Best case, we have until tomorrow morning. Worst case, they could return by nightfall." Willow's shoulders sagged slightly, but her resolve remained visible in her posture. "Then we need to leave before they return." "Not necessarily," Killian said, his mind working through options. "They'll expect that. They'll have men watching the trails." He moved to the window, staring out at the land he'd called home for 8 years. "We might have a better chance defending this position." "I won't let you sacrifice your home for me," Willow insisted. Killian turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Sometimes a home is just a place. Sometimes it's worth risking for something that matters. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. When had he decided that her cause, that she mattered enough to risk everything he'd built? Charged silence filled the space between them until Killian broke it, returning to practicalities. We need to prepare. There's work to do if we're going to be ready for Reese. The remainder of the afternoon passed in focused activity. Killian showed Willow his defensive preparations, firing positions, ammunition caches, the escape tunnel, while adding new measures specifically designed for their current threat. They moved essential supplies to the root cellar, created additional cover near the windows, and established signals to coordinate their actions if they became separated. Through it all, a strange camaraderie developed between them. Willow proved herself both capable and quick to learn, adapting to Killian's terse instructions without complaint. For his part, Killian found himself increasingly impressed by her resilience and practical intelligence. As evening approached, they took a brief respite to eat a hearty meal, knowing they might not have another chance for some time. Sitting across from each other at Killian's small table, the imminent danger temporarily held at bay, they found conversation flowing more easily than before. "You were an officer, weren't you?" Willow asked, observing the methodical way he'd organized their defenses. Killian nodded once. "Captain, 6th Wisconsin Infantry." He didn't elaborate on the battles he'd seen or the men he'd lost. "My father wanted to enlist," Willow offered. But his leg had been badly broken in a riding accident years before. He served as a circuit judge instead, traveling to mining camps and settlements delivering justice where there was often none. "Sounds like a good man," Killian commented. "He was." Willow's voice softened with memory. "After my mother died when I was 12, it was just the two of us. He made sure I received an education equal to any man's, even sending me to boarding school in St. Louis." A wry smile touched her lips. He was quite progressive in his thinking, which didn't always make him popular in certain circles. "And you, what did you do before?" Killian gestured vaguely to encompass their current situation. "I taught school in Helena," she replied. "Not very exciting compared to your life, I imagine." Killian gave a short laugh devoid of humor. "Excitement's overrated. Teaching children, that's something worthwhile." Willow studied him thoughtfully. "You're not what I expected when I first saw you, Killian Xanders." "What did you expect?" he asked, curious despite himself. "Just another hard, bitter man who'd lost his way in this wilderness," she admitted candidly. "There are many such men in the territories, but you're different. There's something principled beneath your gruffness." Killian shifted uncomfortably under her perceptive gaze. "Don't mistake necessity for virtue, Miss Grayson. I've done things I'm not proud of." "Haven't we all?" she countered softly. "It's what we choose to do next that defines us." Before Killian could respond to this philosophical turn, his attention was caught by a sound outside so faint that most would have missed it. He raised a hand for silence, his body instantly alert. "Someone's out there," he whispered, moving silently to extinguish the oil lamp. In the sudden darkness, they both froze, listening intently. There it was again, the subtle crunch of a footstep trying not to be heard. "Back window," Killian breathed, barely audible. "The root cellar, go." "I won't leave you," Willow protested in an equally quiet voice. "Not leaving," he clarified. "Flanking. I'll create a distraction. You circle behind through the tunnel. Anyone out there won't expect an attack from the rear." Understanding dawned in her eyes, visible even in the dim light filtering through the windows. She nodded once and moved silently toward the bedroom, the Winchester carbine held competently in her hands. Killian waited until she had disappeared through the trapdoor before setting his plan in motion. Moving to the fireplace, he grabbed a burning log and hurled it through the front window with a crash of breaking glass. In the same motion, he rolled to a position beside the door, shotgun ready. The distraction worked as intended. Shouts erupted outside, followed by the distinctive sound of gunfire as the intruders fired at the now burning curtains. Killian counted 4 different weapons, more men than he'd anticipated. Reese must have been closer than they thought, with his full contingent already assembled. Using the confusion to his advantage, Killian fired the shotgun through the doorway. not aiming to hit anyone but to force them to take cover. More shots answered his, splintering wood around the cabin's windows and door. "Throw down your weapons and send out the woman." A commanding voice called from the darkness. "You're surrounded and we only want her, not you." "No one here but me," Killian shouted back, moving to a new position by the side window. "And I don't take kindly to being shot at on my own property," a harsh laugh answered him. "Don't play games, Xanders. We know she's there. My men saw her horse. This is your last chance to walk away from this alive." So they knew his name had likely asked about the reclusive rancher in the valley before approaching. Killian fired again, this time with more purpose, rewarded by a cry of pain from somewhere to his left. "That's your answer," Killian called, ducking as a volley of bullets shattered what remained of the front window. The exchange continued for several tense minutes, Killian carefully rationing his shots while keeping track of the attackers' positions. The fire he'd started with the log was spreading, illuminating portions of the cabin's interior in a dangerous glow that would soon make his position untenable. Where was Willow? She should have emerged from the tunnel by now, unless something had gone wrong. Killian was considering a dash to the bedroom to check when a fusillade of shots erupted from behind the attacker's position. Willow had made it out and was executing their plan perfectly, firing rapidly to create the impression of multiple defenders. The surprise attack from the rear threw Reese's men into momentary confusion, which Killian immediately exploited by bursting through the front door, shotgun blazing. 2 of the attackers fell in the initial assault. A third scrambled for cover behind the water trough, firing wildly as he retreated. The 4th man, taller than the others, with a distinctive scar visible in the firelight, must be Reese himself. He maintained his composure, returning fire with calculated precision that forced Killian to dive behind the chopping block. "Impressive coordination," Reese called, his voice cold and professional, but ultimately futile. "Blackstone wants those documents and he wants the woman silenced." "I always complete my assignments." "Not this time," Killian responded, trying to locate Willow's position without giving it away. He could no longer hear her rifle, which concerned him. Reese seemed to sense his worry. "Your lady friend has gone quiet. Perhaps my man got lucky." The taunt struck deeper than Killian would have expected. The thought of Willow injured or worse caused a surge of protective rage that momentarily clouded his tactical judgment. He rose to fire at Reese's voice and was rewarded with a burning graze along his left arm as the enforcer's bullet found its mark. Killian dropped back into cover, cursing his lapse. The wound wasn't serious, but it was a stark reminder that emotions had no place in a gunfight. He needed to regain his focus if either of them was to survive the night. The standoff continued for several more exchanges, neither side gaining a clear advantage. The cabin fire had spread to the roof now, illuminating the yard in flickering orange light that created unpredictable shadows. Killian was down to his revolver and last few shotgun shells, with no clear shot at either Reese or his remaining man. Then, unexpectedly, Willow's voice rang out from somewhere to Killian's right. "Reese, I have the documents right here. Come and get them." Killian's heart froze. What was she doing? Drawing fire to herself. Before he could shout a warning, he saw her step into the open, silhouetted against the burning cabin, papers held high in one hand. "These are copies," she called defiantly. "The originals are already on their way to Fort Benton with a trusted messenger." Killing me won't save Blackstone now. It was a desperate bluff, but delivered with such conviction that it momentarily stunned both Reese and his remaining gunmen. That hesitation was all Killian needed. He fired twice in rapid succession, dropping the henchman with the first shot and forcing Reese to dive for new cover with the second. Willow used the distraction to dash toward Killian's position, firing the carbine one-handed to keep Reese pinned down. As she reached Killian's side, he noticed blood streaming from a wound on her temple, not serious, but evidence she'd had her own close call. "That was reckless," he growled, pulling her down beside him as Reese's bullets splintered wood inches above their heads. "It worked, didn't it?" She returned, reloading the carbine with practiced efficiency despite her injury. "Your bluff won't hold for long," Killian warned, He knows there's been no messenger. Willow's eyes met his, determination blazing in their green depths. It wasn't entirely a bluff. I made copies of the key documents before I left Helena, hidden them in multiple locations with instructions to send them to the territorial governor if I don't return within 2 weeks. Killian stared at her with newfound respect. You thought this through. I'm my father's daughter, she said simply. Their exchange was interrupted by Reese's voice closer now. A clever story, Miss Grayson, but ultimately irrelevant. Blackstone doesn't leave loose ends, copies, or originals. He's moving to flank us, Killian whispered. On 3, run for the stable. I'll cover you. Willow shook her head firmly. Together or not at all. There was no time to argue. Reese was too experienced, too dangerous to allow him any further advantage. Making a swift decision, Killian nodded toward the burning cabin. The root cellar, there's ammunition stored there, when it catches. Understanding dawned in Willow's eyes. The explosion would be substantial, potentially creating both a diversion and confusion they could use to escape, but timing would be critical. Now. Killian shouted, rising to fire repeatedly in Reese's direction, while Willow made a dash toward the stable. Reese returned fire, his bullet grazing Killian's thigh as he followed Willow's path. They reached the stable seconds before the first ammunition caches in the burning cabin began to explode, the sound like a small cannon in the night air. Reese, momentarily distracted by the explosion, left himself exposed just long enough for Killian to take careful aim with his revolver. The shot rang out, distinct even among the continuing explosions from the cabin. Reese staggered, clutching his chest, but remained upright through sheer force of will. Finish him, Willow urged, already saddling her horse with remarkable speed given her injury. Killian raised his revolver again, but something, perhaps a vestige of the man he'd been before the war, made him hesitate. That moment's mercy nearly cost him everything as Reese, despite his wound, managed to level his own weapon. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Reese's bullet whistled past Killian's ear close enough to feel its passage. Killian's found its mark, and this time Blackstone's enforcer fell and did not rise again. We need to go, Willow insisted, leading her now saddled horse from the stall. The explosions will attract attention from miles around. Killian nodded, quickly preparing his own mount. Within minutes, they were riding away from the burning homestead, heading northwest toward a ridge Killian knew would provide both cover and a vantage point to ensure they weren't followed. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, pushing the horses as hard as they dared in the darkness. Finally, upon reaching the safety of the ridge, they paused to rest the animals and assess their situation. Killian dismounted stiffly, the wound in his thigh protesting the movement. In the moonlight, he could see Willow's face was pale beneath the blood from her head wound, but her eyes remained clear and focused. We should clean those injuries, she said, sliding from her saddle with greater grace than he'd managed despite her own exhaustion. Later, Killian replied, scanning the horizon. In the distance, his cabin continued to burn, a bright orange glow against the night sky. 8 years of solitary life consumed in flames. Strangely, he felt little regret, only a sense of closing one chapter and perhaps opening another. I'm sorry about your home, Willow said softly, coming to stand beside him. Killian shrugged. Just a place, he repeated his earlier sentiment, though this time with more conviction. The important thing is the documents are safe. Willow patted her saddlebag. Yes. And now we have a clear path to Fort Benton. Killian questioned, turning to face her. Unless you have other plans, she challenged, a hint of vulnerability beneath her brave facade. The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had considered before this night. Killian found himself studying her face, the determination in her jawline, the intelligence in her eyes, the surprising softness of her mouth despite the hardships she'd endured. No, he said finally. No other plans. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of a connection forged in danger, but potentially lasting beyond it. Willow's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones in a gesture that felt both natural and extraordinary. Then we ride for Fort Benton at first light, she decided. Together. As the adrenaline of combat faded, the reality of their injuries demanded attention. They made a small, sheltered camp in a grove of pines, far enough from the ridge to avoid being silhouetted against the skyline. Killian's wilderness skills provided them with basic comfort, despite their limited supplies. Willow insisted on tending Killian's wounds first, cleaning the bullet grazes with water from their canteens, and whiskey from the flask he always carried. Her touch was gentle but confident, suggesting experience with such care. "You've done this before," Killian observed as she bandaged his arm with a strip torn from her petticoat. "My father's court sometimes convened in mining camps," she explained. "I often accompanied him as his clerk. Mining accidents were common. You learn to improvise medical care when proper doctors are scarce." When she finished with his injuries, Killian returned the favor, carefully cleaning the cut on her temple where a bullet had come far too close. His large hands moved with surprising delicacy, treating her as something precious rather than the hardened survivor she'd proven herself to be. "You didn't tell me how you got this," he said, his voice low. "One of Reese's men was waiting near the tunnel exit," Willow admitted. "I wasn't as stealthy as I should have been." Killian's hands paused in their work. "You killed him. It wasn't a question." "Yes." Her green eyes met his without apology or distress. "It was him or me, and I have a mission to complete." Killian nodded once, acknowledging both her action and her purpose without judgment. In this wild country, survival often required difficult choices. That she could make such choices while maintaining her core principles only increased his growing admiration. With their wounds tended and a small fire carefully shielded to avoid detection, they shared the last of Killian's jerky and coffee. The night had grown cold, as Montana nights often did even in summer, and they sat close together for warmth. "What will you do after Fort Benton?" Killian asked after a comfortable silence. "Once the documents are delivered." Willow considered the question, gazing into the small flames. "I hadn't thought much beyond justice for my father, perhaps return to teaching." She glanced at him. "What about you? Will you rebuild your ranch?" Killian shook his head slowly. "No, that life was a hiding place, I think, somewhere to lick wounds that never quite healed." "The war?" she asked gently. "Partly," he acknowledged. "And what came after?" "Watched too many powerful men twist the peace to serve their own interests while good people suffered. Decided I wanted no part of it." He poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkness. "Easier to retreat than to keep fighting battles you can't win." "Yet here you are," Willow observed, "fighting again." Killian looked up, meeting her gaze. "Here I am," he agreed quietly. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that transcended their brief acquaintance. Willow reached out, her fingers lightly tracing the scar that ran along his jawline. "We all have scars," she murmured. "Visible and invisible." Killian caught her hand, holding it against his face for a moment before slowly releasing it. "We should rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Long ride tomorrow." They settled for sleep, close enough to share warmth, but with a careful space maintained between them, a space filled with unacknowledged possibilities, and the awareness that their journey together had barely begun. Dawn found them already mounted and moving northward, following game trails and creek beds rather than established roads to avoid any remaining pursuit. Killian led the way, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they navigated the challenging landscape. By midday, they had covered significant ground and paused to rest the horses beside a clear stream. The summer sun beat down intensely, and Willow removed her hat to splash water on her face, wincing slightly as it touched her wound. "Still hurting?" Killian asked, noticing her discomfort. "It's nothing," she dismissed. "I've had worse falls from horses." Killian smiled faintly at her bravado. "You're tougher than you look, Willow Grayson." "As are you, Killian Xanders," she returned with a matching smile, "though you look fairly tough to begin with." The easy camaraderie that had developed between them made the rigors of travel more bearable. As they continued their journey through the afternoon, Willow shared stories of her father's cases and her experiences teaching in Helena, while Killian occasionally offered insights into the land they traversed. pointing out landmarks and signs of wildlife with the expertise of one who had made the wilderness his home. What he didn't share were personal details of his past, the family he'd lost to influenza before the war, the atrocities he'd witnessed on battlefields from Shiloh to Petersburg, or the disillusionment that had led him to abandon civilization for the solitude of his remote ranch. Yet somehow, riding beside this determined woman with her clear sense of justice, those memories seemed less haunting than they had for years. They made camp that evening in a sheltered ravine, having seen no sign of pursuit. Their dinner consisted of rabbit Killian had shot along the trail, supplemented with wild onions Willow had recognized and gathered. 2 more days to Fort Benton, if the weather holds, Killian estimated as they finished their meal. Willow nodded, adding another small branch to their fire. And then justice for my father, for all of Blackstone's victims. You really believe in that, don't you? Killian asked, studying her across the flames. Justice, don't you? She countered. Killian considered the question seriously. I used to. Before I saw how easily justice could be bought or manipulated by men with power and money. Like Blackstone, Willow acknowledged. But that's precisely why we must fight harder for true justice. If good people abandon the struggle because it's difficult, men like Blackstone win by default. Her passion was compelling, reminiscent of ideals Killian had once held dear before experience had tempered them with cynicism. Yet there was nothing naive about Willow's conviction she had faced danger and death, had taken a life when necessary, all while maintaining her core belief in the possibility of justice. Your father would be proud, Killian said softly. Willow's expression softened. I hope so. She hesitated, then added, he would have liked you, I think. A reclusive ex-soldier with questionable social skills. Killian raised an eyebrow skeptically. A man of principle, Willow corrected. Someone willing to risk everything to help a stranger in need. Her gaze held his steadily. Someone who, perhaps, is rediscovering parts of himself he thought were lost. Killian looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. Don't mistake momentary courage for lasting change, Miss Grayson. I rarely mistake anything, Mr. Xanders, she replied with quiet confidence. Especially when it comes to judging character. Sleep came more easily that night despite the hard ground beneath them. The shared danger had created a trust that allowed both to rest more deeply than either would have thought possible in such circumstances. They resumed their journey at first light, making good progress through increasingly varied terrain as they approached the Missouri River. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a high plateau that afforded views of the distant river valley where Fort Benton lay. We'll reach the river crossing by tomorrow noon, Killian predicted, surveying the landscape with practiced eyes. Fort Benton the following morning, Willow nodded, but her attention was caught by something else. Riders, she said suddenly, pointing to a distant dust cloud moving parallel to their route. 3, maybe 4. Killian followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Too many to be ordinary travelers in this country. He studied their direction. They're heading for the river crossing, cutting us off. Blackstone's men. Willow's hand moved instinctively to the carbine secured to her saddle. Likely, Killian confirmed grimly. Reese would have sent word of our direction before confronting us. They're guessing our destination. Willow's jaw set determinedly. Then we find another way. There's only one safe crossing for 50 miles in either direction, Killian explained. But, he paused, considering alternatives. There is another option, dangerous, but they won't expect it. I'm listening, Willow said, her expression indicating she was prepared for whatever risk might be necessary. Killian pointed to a line of bluffs to the northwest. Broken Knife Canyon cuts through those bluffs directly to the Missouri, about 10 miles downriver from the main crossing. Narrows to barely shoulder width in places, with a 100-foot drop to rocks below. Sounds delightful, Willow remarked dryly. What's the catch besides the obvious danger of plummeting to our deaths? The canyon ends at the river, but there's no gentle slope down, just a 20-foot drop to the water. The horses will have to jump. Killian's tone made it clear this was no small risk. Willow considered their options, her gaze returning to the distant riders. I trust your judgment, Killian. If you think we can make it through this canyon, I'm willing to try. Her faith in him stirred something deep within Killian's chest, something he'd thought long buried beneath years of isolation and self-reliance. Without analyzing the feeling too closely, he nodded decisively. We'll head for Broken Knife. Reach it by nightfall, camp at the entrance, and navigate it at first light when we can see clearly. They altered their course accordingly, pushing their horses harder now that they knew pursuit was close. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the bluffs, requiring all of Killian's backcountry skills to find traversable paths. By sunset, they had reached the entrance to Broken Knife Canyon, a narrow, jagged split in the towering bluffs that seemed to disappear into darkness. They made camp a short distance away, positioning themselves where they could observe both the canyon entrance and the approach from the east. How did you learn about this place? Willow asked as they shared the last of their provisions, hardtack and jerky washed down with water from a nearby spring. Spent time with a Blackfoot hunting party years back, Killian explained. They showed me paths through this country that most white men never find. This canyon was sacred to them, a place where warriors would come to seek visions. Have you traveled it before? Once, he admitted. Not with horses. Willow absorbed this information without visible alarm. Then tomorrow will be an adventure for all of us. Her calm acceptance of the risk ahead impressed Killian anew. Most women of her background, most men, for that matter, would have shown more fear at the prospect of navigating such treacherous terrain with uncertain outcome. You're not what I expected either, he said, echoing her earlier comment about him. Willow smiled, the expression transforming her face despite the dirt and fatigue of their journey. What did you expect when a woman walked up your porch steps that evening? Certainly not someone who would help me rediscover purpose, Killian replied with unexpected candor, or make me question whether isolation was the right choice after all. The admission hung between them, more revealing than he had intended. Willow's smile softened into something more contemplative as she held his gaze across the small fire. Life rarely gives us what we expect, she said quietly. Sometimes it gives us what we need instead. The simplicity of her wisdom struck Killian deeply. Before he could respond, however, their attention was drawn to a distant sound horses approaching from the east. They've tracked us, Killian said, immediately dousing their fire. We need to move into the canyon now. Night or not, we can't risk being caught in the open. They quickly gathered their minimal gear and mounted, Killian leading the way into the narrow mouth of Broken Knife Canyon. The nearly full moon provided just enough light to navigate, though shadows made distances deceptive and footing treacherous. The canyon walls rose precipitously on either side, sometimes so close they had to ride single file with their legs pressed against the rock face. The horses moved nervously, sensing the danger but responding to their riders' firm guidance. Behind them, voices echoed their pursuers had found their abandoned campsite and were debating whether to follow into the canyon at night. Killian and Willow pressed forward, putting distance between themselves and the entrance, knowing their only chance was to emerge at the river before their pursuers caught up. The night journey through Broken Knife Canyon became a test of nerve and skill. In places, the path narrowed to barely 3 feet wide, with a sheer drop on one side that disappeared into blackness. In others, fallen rocks created obstacles that had to be carefully navigated or cleared. Throughout it all, Willow maintained her composure, following Killian's lead with unwavering trust. When a section of path had partially collapsed, requiring them to dismount and lead the horses across a precarious ledge, she did so without complaint or hesitation. Almost halfway, Killian encouraged as they remounted after the difficult passage. The worst is behind us. As if to mock his optimism, a gunshot echoed through the canyon, the sound amplified by the rock walls. Their pursuers had entered the canyon despite the darkness. They're gambling, Killian observed grimly. Hoping to catch us before we reach the river. Can they catch up? Willow asked, no fear in her voice, only tactical assessment. Not if we keep moving, Killian assured her. The path widens ahead, we can make better time. True to his word, the canyon gradually broadened, allowing them to ride side by side and occasionally trot where footing permitted. The moon had risen higher, providing better visibility as they progressed deeper into the ancient passage. Behind them, occasional shouts and the sounds of dislodged rocks indicated their pursuers were having a more difficult time navigating the narrower sections in darkness. The distance between them was growing rather than shrinking, a fact that allowed Killian and Willow to breathe slightly easier as they continued their careful progress. Near midnight, they reached a small grotto where a spring trickled from the canyon wall, creating a tiny oasis of vegetation. Killian called a brief halt to rest the horses and drink the fresh water. "How much further?" Willow asked, stretching her stiff muscles after hours in the saddle. "Another few hours to the river," Killian estimated. "We're making good time." As they prepared to continue, Willow suddenly placed her hand on Killian's arm. "Listen," she whispered. The canyon had fallen silent. No more shouts or sounds of pursuit echoed from behind them. "They've either given up or found another route," Killian said, his expression troubled by the latter possibility. "Is there another way they could intercept us?" Killian considered the terrain they had yet to traverse. "Not within the canyon. But if they backtrack and circle around, they could be waiting at the river exit." This sobering possibility added urgency to their journey. They pressed on through the night, the canyon gradually widening as it approached the Missouri River. By the first hints of dawn, they could smell the water and hear its distant flow. As the path descended toward the river, Killian held up his hand for a halt. Ahead, the canyon opened to reveal the Missouri flowing broad and powerful below a sheer drop of approximately 20 feet. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, providing enough visibility to assess their final challenge. "That's quite a jump," Willow observed, surveying the distance to the water. "The river's deep here," Killian assured her. "Indians used this as a proving ground for young warriors. The danger is not the water but the current. Once we jump, we'll need to swim the horses diagonally to that sandbar." He pointed to a narrow strip of land about 100 yards downstream. Willow nodded, gathering her reins more securely. "I'm ready when you are." Killian studied her face in the growing light, the determination in her eyes, the trust she placed in him despite the danger ahead. In that moment, he made a decision that had been forming gradually since she first appeared on his porch. "Willow," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "If we make it through this, when we make it through this, I'd like to." He paused, searching for words to express feelings long dormant. Her expression softened with understanding. "I know," she said simply. "Me too." The moment was interrupted by a shout from the canyon behind them. Turning, they saw two riders emerge from a bend in the path, rifles raised. "Now," Killian urged, spurring his horse forward. Together they raced the final yards to the canyon's edge. The pursuing riders fired, their bullets striking rock nearby as Killian and Willow's horses launched into space, suspended momentarily above the rushing waters of the Missouri, before plunging into its depths. The impact drove the breath from Killian's lungs. Cold water closed over his head as he maintained his grip on the reins, guiding his panicked horse toward the surface. They broke into air moments later, the horse swimming strongly despite its fear. Nearby, Willow had also surfaced, her red hair plastered to her head as she expertly directed her mount against the current. Shots rang out from the canyon rim, sending waterspouts rising around them, but the distance and moving targets made accuracy impossible. Killian and Willow focused on reaching the sandbar, letting the current carry them downstream while swimming diagonally toward shore. Their pursuers' frustrated shouts faded behind them as they approached the sandbar. The horses found footing on the river bottom, lurching forward through chest-deep water until they reached the narrow strip of land, exhausted but triumphant. "We made it," Willow laughed, half in relief and half in exhilaration as she slid from her saddle to stand on solid ground. Killian dismounted beside her, scanning the shoreline for potential threats before allowing himself to share in her victory. "Fort Benton is just a few hours downriver," he confirmed. "We can follow this bank all the way there." Soaked to the skin but spirits undampened, they took a few minutes to rest the horses and wring what water they could from their clothing. The summer sun, now fully risen, would soon dry them as they continued their journey. As they prepared to mount again, Willow turned to Killian, her expression suddenly serious. "What you were going to say, back there at the canyon's edge." Killian met her gaze directly, finding courage in the connection that had grown between them through danger and shared purpose. "I was going to say that I'd like to see what might be possible between us, beyond this mission of yours, if you were amenable." A slow smile spread across Willow's face. "I am very amenable, Killian Xanders." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "In fact, I was hoping you might say something of the sort." The kiss that followed was tentative at first, the careful exploration of two people who had learned caution through life's hardships. But it quickly deepened into something more profound, a recognition of the rare connection they had discovered in the most unexpected circumstances. When they finally parted, Killian's hand remained gently cupped around Willow's face, his thumb tracing the healing cut on her temple. "We should reach Fort Benton," he said reluctantly. "Yes," she agreed, though neither moved immediately to mount their horses. Justice first, then possibilities. The remainder of their journey passed without incident. By early afternoon, the stone walls and wooden buildings of Fort Benton came into view, the uppermost navigable port on the Missouri River, and a critical hub of commerce and law enforcement for the territory. As they rode into the settlement, Killian was acutely aware of the contrast they presented to the busy traders, steamboat crews, and townspeople going about their business. Soaked, muddy, and bearing visible injuries, they drew curious and sometimes suspicious glances. "The marshal's office will be near the center of town," Willow said, straightening her posture despite her exhaustion. The documents that had cost so much to protect were secured inside her still damp jacket, close to her heart. They found the territorial marshal's office in a sturdy building adjacent to the fort itself. Marshal James Harker, a gray-haired veteran with sharp eyes that missed nothing, received them with initial skepticism that quickly transformed to intense interest as Willow presented the documents and explained their significance. "Judge Grayson was a good man," Harker said when she had finished. "One of the few honest judges in the territory. His death was reported as a robbery, but many suspected otherwise." He leafed through the papers with growing satisfaction. "This is enough to bring Blackstone down and several territorial officials with him. Will you act on it?" Killian asked directly, standing protectively near Willow. Harker's gaze shifted to him, assessing. "You're not just a concerned citizen in this, I take it. Mr. Xanders lost his home and nearly his life helping me bring these documents to you," Willow explained. "Blackstone's men pursued us the entire way." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "I've been building a case against Blackstone for 2 years, but his influence has made witnesses disappear or change their stories. With this evidence and your testimony, Miss Grayson, we can finally move against him." He looked between them. "Though I should warn you both, you'll need protection until this is resolved. Blackstone won't stop coming after you." "We're staying in Fort Benton?" Killian asked, the question directed more at Willow than the marshal. "For now," Willow replied firmly. "I intend to see this through to the end." Marshal Harker arranged secure accommodations for them at the fort itself, separate but adjacent quarters that reflected propriety while acknowledging their need to remain close for safety. He also assigned deputies to guard them while he organized a force to arrest Blackstone and his associates. That evening, cleaned, bandaged, and dressed in borrowed clothes that approximately fit, Killian and Willow shared a private meal in Willow's quarters. The simple food prepared by the fort's cook tasted like a feast after days of hardship on the trail. "Marshal Harker seems competent," Killian observed, watching Willow across the small table. The lamplight softened her features, highlighting the natural elegance that even frontier conditions couldn't diminish. "Yes," she agreed. "Father spoke highly of him, one of the few law enforcement officials Blackstone couldn't buy." She sipped the surprisingly good coffee provided with their meal. "He says the territorial governor will arrive within a week to oversee the proceedings personally." Killian nodded, pleased by this development while simultaneously aware of what it meant for their immediate future. A week in Fort Benton, then. "At least," Willow confirmed, her eyes meeting his with unspoken question. "And after that, What were those possibilities you mentioned? Killian set down his coffee cup, choosing his words carefully. I've been thinking about that. My ranch is gone, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was more hiding place than home. What would you want instead? Willow asked softly. Purpose, he answered without hesitation. Something worth building, worth protecting. His gaze held her steadily. Someone worth sharing it with. Willow's smile was radiant despite her lingering exhaustion. I believe I would like that very much, Killian Xanders. Their conversation continued late into the evening, moving from immediate practicalities to deeper discussions of hopes and dreams long set aside during their respective struggles. When Killian finally retired to his own quarters, it was with a sense of anticipation for the future that he hadn't experienced in years. The following days established a new routine. Mornings were spent giving detailed statements to Marshal Harker and his deputies, documenting every aspect of Blackstone's operations revealed in Judge Grayson's evidence. Afternoons often found them exploring Fort Benton together, gradually relaxing as the Marshal's men provided constant but discreet protection. 4 days after their arrival, Marshal Harker returned from an expedition with news that Blackstone had been arrested at his Helena mansion, along with 2 territorial officials implicated in the documents. The danger was not entirely past. Blackstone had other allies and hired guns, but the immediate threat had diminished significantly. That evening, feeling secure enough to venture beyond the fort's walls, Killian took Willow to dinner at Fort Benton's finest establishment, a riverside hotel that catered to wealthy travelers and steamboat captains. Though still modest by Eastern standards, it represented luxury neither had experienced in some time. Dressed in new clothes purchased with an advance against the reward offered for Blackstone's capture, they made a striking couple. Killian, cleaned up and properly attired, revealed the handsome features usually hidden beneath trail dust and unkempt beard. Willow, in a simple but elegant blue dress, drew admiring glances that Killian noted with a mixture of pride and possessiveness. This feels strange, he admitted as they were seated at a table overlooking the Missouri, being back in civilization. Good strange or bad strange? Willow asked, studying him across the candlelit table. Different, Killian decided after consideration, not as uncomfortable as I expected. Willow's smile held a hint of mischief. Perhaps you're not as much of a hermit as you believed. Perhaps it depends on the company, he countered, holding her gaze. Their dinner conversation ranged widely, from childhood memories previously unshared to books they had read to hopes for the territory's future. Once corruption like Blackstone's was rooted out. With each exchange, the connection between them deepened, transcending the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting to reveal a compatibility neither had dared hope for. As they walked back to the fort under the stars, Killian took Willow's hand in his, a public acknowledgement of what had been growing between them. She intertwined her fingers with his, the simple gesture communicating more than words could express. I've been thinking, Killian said as they approached the fort's entrance, about what comes next. And what have you concluded? Willow asked, her tone light but her expression attentive. The marshal mentioned that the territorial governor is establishing a new circuit court to handle cases in the mining districts. They'll need marshals to enforce the court's decisions. Killian paused, gauging her reaction. He suggested I might be suited for such a position. Willow's face brightened with interest. That sounds perfect for you, your military background, your knowledge of the territory. It would mean traveling, Killian continued, not settling in one place, at least not immediately. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. I wondered how you might feel about that kind of life. The question hung between them, its deeper meaning clear to both. Willow reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with gentle affection. I think, she said slowly, that I've spent enough time in one place. Teaching was rewarding, but I've discovered I have a taste for adventure. Her smile widened, especially with the right companion. Relief and joy mingled in Killian's expression. He drew her closer, no longer concerned with the propriety that might have guided his actions in earlier days. I was hoping you might say that. Their kiss beneath the Montana stars sealed an unspoken promise of partnership, of shared purpose, of a future neither had imagined possible when Willow first walked up the steps of a lonely ranch house at sunset. The territorial governor arrived in Fort Benton 3 days later, bringing with him a circuit judge and additional federal marshals to process the cases against Blackstone and his associates. The evidence Willow had risked her life to deliver proved as damning as Marshal Harker had predicted. At a private meeting with the governor, Willow and Killian provided detailed testimony about Blackstone's attempts to recover the documents and silence them. The governor, impressed by their courage and resourcefulness, personally thanked them for their service to justice in the territory. "Miss Grayson," the governor said as their meeting concluded, "your father would be extremely proud of what you've accomplished. We've lost a fine judge, but his legacy will live on in the reforms these cases will bring about." Willow accepted the compliment with dignity, though Killian could see the emotion it stirred in her. "Thank you, Governor. That means a great deal to me." As they prepared to leave, the governor addressed Killian directly. "Marshal Harker speaks very highly of your abilities, Mr. Xanders. He tells me you're considering a position with the territorial marshals." "I am, sir," Killian confirmed. "Excellent. We need men of character and courage." The governor glanced between them with perceptive understanding. "I understand you two have formed quite a partnership during these events." Willow's hand found Killian's, her grip firm and sure. "We have, Governor." "Then may I suggest an arrangement that might suit you both?" the governor proposed. "The new circuit court will require not only marshals but also court clerks and recorders who can document proceedings properly. Miss Grayson, with your education and experience as your father's clerk, you would be ideally qualified for such a position. The possibility of working together in complementary roles, bringing justice to the same territories where corruption had previously reigned, appealed to them both." By the time they left the governor's temporary office, their future had taken shape with surprising clarity. 2 weeks later, with Blackstone and his key associates securely held for trial and the immediate danger past, Killian and Willow stood on the deck of a steamboat preparing to depart Fort Benton. Their destination was a small settlement upriver where the circuit court would hold its first session under the new arrangement. Killian wore the badge of a territorial marshal, its weight both physical and symbolic of the responsibility he had chosen to accept. Beside him, Willow carried a case containing the official documents and supplies for her role as court clerk and recorder. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, noticing his contemplative expression as he gazed at the busy riverfront. "Not about us," he assured her, taking her hand. "Just thinking about how much has changed since you walked up those porch steps." "For the better?" Willow's question held no real doubt, but she seemed to enjoy hearing his confirmation. "Definitely for the better," Killian affirmed, drawing her closer as the steamboat's whistle signaled imminent departure. "Though I never imagined sunset that evening would lead to this sunrise." As the boat pulled away from the dock, beginning their journey into a shared future neither had anticipated, Killian reflected on the strange turns life could take. He had lost a home but found a purpose. More importantly, he had found someone who understood both his past scars and his capacity for renewal. The Montana wilderness stretched before them, vast and challenging, but no longer a place of isolation. Together, they would bring justice to remote settlements, building something meaningful from the ashes of what each had lost. And in the quiet moments between duties, in the evenings when they could simply be Killian and Willow rather than Marshal Xanders and Court Clerk Grayson, they would continue discovering the depth of connection that had begun when a lonely cowboy sat on his porch at sunset, and a determined woman walked up the steps and changed his night and ultimately, his life. 3 years later, Killian stood on the porch of a modest but well-built house overlooking a different valley, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in familiar hues of gold and crimson. The rocking chair beside him was no longer solitary, a matching one accommodated Willow, her hand resting comfortably in his as they shared this peaceful moment. Their work with the circuit court had proven both challenging and rewarding. Together, They had helped bring justice to dozens of remote settlements, gradually replacing corruption with the rule of law. Killian's fair but firm approach to enforcing court decisions had earned him respect throughout the territory, while Willow's meticulous documentation and natural diplomacy had made her indispensable to the circuit judge. 6 months ago, they had finally established this permanent home a place to return to between court circuits, a foundation for the future they now shared as husband and wife. Their wedding, performed by the circuit judge himself in a small ceremony attended by Marshal Harker and a few close friends, had formalized a partnership already proven in adversity. "What are you thinking about?" Willow asked, noticing Killian's contemplative expression. "Just appreciating how different this sunset is from the one when we met," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Same colors, different meaning," Willow smiled, understanding as she always did the deeper currents beneath his words. "Then you were watching the sun set on a life. Now we're watching it set on a day, knowing tomorrow brings another sunrise." "Always the poet," Killian teased affectionately, though her assessment was accurate. The sunset no longer symbolized endings and isolation, but merely a pause in an ongoing journey shared. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention not with the tension such sounds once provoked, but with pleasant anticipation. A rider appeared on the trail leading to their home, familiar even at a distance. "Right on time," Willow observed as Marshal Harker, now their friend as well as colleague, dismounted at their hitching post. "Evening, Xanders," Harker called, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Mrs. Xanders." He nodded respectfully to Willow. "Hope I'm not interrupting your peaceful evening." "You're always welcome, James," Willow assured him, rising to fetch the coffee she had prepared in expectation of his visit. While she went inside, Harker joined Killian on the porch, accepting the offered chair with a grateful sigh. "Getting too old for these long rides," he complained good-naturedly. "Yet you made the journey personally instead of sending a deputy," Killian observed. "Must be important news." Harker nodded, his expression becoming more serious. "The governor's appointed a new judge for the Northern Circuit. Starting next month." "About time," Killian commented. "Judge Parker's been trying to cover too much territory." "That's not all," Harker continued, accepting the coffee Willow brought out before retaking her seat. "He's establishing a permanent court in Copper Creek. Wants you as the town marshal, Killian, and you, Mrs. Xanders, as court administrator." The offer represented a significant change, a chance to settle permanently in one community rather than continuing their circuit travels. Copper Creek, once a small settlement, had grown into a respectable town, located coincidentally not far from where Killian's original ranch had stood. "Permanent positions," Willow mused, exchanging a meaningful glance with Killian. That would be a change. "A welcome one, perhaps," Killian suggested, his expression conveying what he didn't say aloud, that such stability might be particularly desirable given the news Willow had shared with him just days earlier about their expanding family. Willow's smile confirmed her agreement. "I think Copper Creek might be the perfect place to put down roots." Marshal Harker looked between them with knowing eyes. "I thought you might feel that way. The positions are yours if you want them. Town council's already approved the appointments." As the three discussed practical details of the transition, the sunset deepened into dusk. Lanterns were lit, dinner was shared, and plans for the future took shape with the easy collaboration of friends who had weathered difficult times together. Later, after Harker had departed for the nearby town where he would spend the night, Killian and Willow stood together at the edge of their porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the star-filled Montana sky. "Copper Creek," Killian said thoughtfully. "Full circle in a way. Not far from where we first met." "A new beginning in a familiar place," Willow agreed, leaning against him. Her hand drifted to her stomach, where the first subtle signs of their child's presence were known only to them. "For all of us." Killian's hand covered hers, the gesture protective and tender. "You changed everything, you know, walking up those steps that evening." "We changed each other," Willow corrected gently. "You showed me strength I didn't know I had. I perhaps reminded you of the good man you've always been, beneath the solitude." As they stood together in the quiet Montana night, Killian reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a lonely porch at sunset to a shared home and future. The path had not been easy or straight, with dangers faced and sacrifices made along the way. But standing here with Willow, with purpose restored, and love discovered where he least expected it, Killian knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worthwhile. "Come inside," Willow said softly after a while, tugging gently at his hand. "Tomorrow we begin planning our new life in Copper Creek." Killian followed willingly, closing the door on the night but not on possibilities. The lonely cowboy who had once watched sunsets in isolation had found something far more valuable than solitude. In Willow's determined green eyes, in her courage and compassion, in the life they were building together, he had found his true home. And as they prepared for sleep that night, discussing names for their unborn child and dreams for their future in Copper Creek, Killian silently thanked whatever fate or providence had guided Willow Grayson to his porch on that sunset 3 years ago, the moment that had transformed a single night and ultimately an entire life.